During the course of the season of Lent, we've been learning about prayer and about being able to recognize God in the things that happen to us each day. And we've been using St. Ignatius's rules of discernment of spirits to reflect upon how we can see God better when certain things going on within us, thoughts, feelings, desires, when they're just ourselves, when they're deceptions of the evil one, or when they come from God himself. We've learned that God wants to give us what Ignatius calls spiritual consolations to try to strengthen us and keep us on track, following him. Whereas our enemy, the bad spirit, will try to bring this disquiet into our hearts, this spiritual desolation, to try to get us to make changes that'll sabotage our relationship with God. And it's during those times of desolation when we feel as though God is so far away from us that we really need to work the most. And last week we considered how the enemy wants us to try to keep all the things going on inside of us secret so that he can keep control over us. But that the sacrament of reconciliation is one way in which we can get great freedom. And a few weeks before that, I mentioned that God never brings us the desolation. It's never something from him. He only wants to bring us consolation. But we didn't answer the question as to, well, then why then do we have those times of desolation? Why are there times in which it feels like prayer is difficult, where it feels like God is far away, where everything just seems hard? Where are you, God? And if we look at St. Ignatius's rules, he tells us that there are 3 reasons why we'll experience those times of desolation. The first reason is our fault, and the second and third reasons are ones that God has for us. So the first reason where we sometimes feel as if God's far away from us, it's our fault. And it's due to us freely choosing to turn away from God. That's what we call sin. Maybe we've gotten lazy or negligent in the amount of time that we spend praying. You know, if we're not spending much time in prayer or any time in prayer, we shouldn't be surprised to find it difficult to understand where God's working in our life, because we haven't given him a chance to talk to us. Remember, though, that during those times it feels like God's far away. Even if we've been sinning, even if it's serious sin, it does not mean that God is not there. It just feels as if he's not there, because we've kind of closed ourselves off from him. He is still there. We're just kind of blocking him. For example, let's say, when we come to Mass and we receive communion, we can experience God in a real profound way, where we can actually tangibly experience Jesus coming into us through Holy Communion. But you might be like, well, how come that doesn't always happen? Well, it might be that we're attached to things of this world, or we've got certain sins in our life that's kind of blocking him from being able to show us forth in the way that he would like to. Could be one of the reasons. Of course, the way to then try to get rid of this desolation is to then turn back to God. Maybe we need to go to confession. We need to take that time in prayer. And that will help that desolation go away. So that's the first reason. It's our fault, because we haven't spent any time with him. So the second and the third reasons. And our gospel today can help us understand why God would allow us to go through these difficult times of desolation. In the gospel, here we have Lazarus. He's ill. He's severely ill, to the point of dying. And Lazarus and his sisters, Martha and Mary, they were all 3 close friends to Jesus. He would stop there in Bethany at their home when he'd come down to Jerusalem. And he'd spend time with them. So they were good friends. And so Martha and Mary at this point send word to Jesus for him to come because of the state that Lazarus is in. But unfortunately, Lazarus dies before Jesus arrives. So we can imagine how Martha and Mary are distraught. Any of us who have lost somebody that's close to us went through the same thing. It's really this time of desolation where we feel as though God's far away from us. We might ask, like Martha and Mary asked, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. God, where are you in this situation in my life? And maybe we've prayed that way before. We've felt that kind of being apart from God. Did Jesus desire for Martha and Mary to go through this pain? Did he really want Lazarus to die? I mean, we even look at the passage and it says that he didn't even leave right away. He waited 2 more days where he was before he came. But Jesus had his reasons. And he has his reasons when he allows us to experience those times of desolation in our life. So God allows this desolation as a kind of test. A test of our love for him. So that we're not relying 100% on the good feelings of his consolation. So that we can love God for who he is, not just for the good feelings of God. So that's what Jesus does for Martha and Mary. He tests their love for him. And so he says to Martha, I'm the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, even if he dies, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? He's testing her. And even though her brother has died, Martha responds by expressing her love for Jesus. Even in this moment when none of those good feelings are around. Yes, Lord, I have come to believe that you are the Christ. And so that's an important thing to ask of ourselves too. Do I love God only when he gives me what I want? Only during those times where everything is going well. That's when I know God's here. Do I still trust and turn to him even when things are difficult, even when things feel as though he's far away? So God will allow us to go through those times because he wants us to learn how to love him. Not just the good things that he gives to us, but he wants us to love himself. So that was the second reason why God will allow us to go through. First is our fault. We turn away from him. Second, he allows us to experience it so that we come to love him and not the things he gives to us. And then finally, the third reason is God will allow us to go through this desolation so that we can understand that we can't make those good feelings of God's presence happen on our own. That those are really things from him. They're a gift from God. They're not my own doing. And let me give an example from my own life. When I was first learning about these rules in the seminary and about consolation and desolation that we've been talking about, I was kind of skeptical, really. It's probably my scientific skeptical background coming through. And I thought, maybe I've had some of those experiences of God's closeness and consolation. I think maybe I have. But what if it was just me? What if it was just me kind of like making myself feel good, like God was there? And so I'm like, well, I don't know how to know the difference. And so in that honesty, I just said that to God. Just like, how do I know if those things are your consolations? Or if it's just wishful thinking on my part? And sometime following that question, I entered this period in which I didn't really feel like praying. Prayer was kind of dry. God felt kind of far away. That's spiritual desolation that I was going into. And I tried to resist that desolation. I tried hard to make myself feel good again, like feel God's presence, trying to pick myself up and just kind of make it happen. And it wasn't working at all. And finally it got to the point where I was just like, okay, God, I don't know what I did to you or why this is going on, so what am I supposed to do? And then suddenly this thought came to me. My son, you wanted to know when something was a consolation and when something was just yours. Don't you see now that you can't make those consolations happen? Only I can do that. And at that moment, I realized that God had allowed me to experience this time of dryness, of desolation, in order to teach me when his consolations are the real thing. That they really exist, and it wasn't just me making stuff up. That they are gifts from him. And that moment with this insight comes to me, this was a moment of great consolation itself, in experiencing God again. And the same thing is true for Martha and Mary here. There was nothing they could do in this situation of their brother's death. They couldn't do anything. They couldn't control it. All they could do is turn to Jesus in their grief, and their prayer was answered. And Jesus broke through their desolation. And what was even more important than Lazarus being raised from the dead was that they had a better understanding of who Jesus was, that he was Lord. And he does the same thing for us. He allows us to experience those difficult things so that we can recognize the times when he is speaking to us, when he brings us the consolation. This final image to understand this, I'm sure you've noticed all the veils covering the statues here in the church. It's a long-standing tradition of the church that we can veil statues on this fifth Sunday of Lent, and they remain veiled until Good Friday. And these veils can make us think of these times of spiritual desolation, when we can't see the Lord. We can't see the statues. They're there, though. We know that they're there. The same way, when we can't experience him, he's still there in those times. And certainly we would rather see the beauty of all of our statues. We would rather experience God's closeness in his consolations. But for now, they're covered. For a short time, God allows himself to be hidden in that desolation. But those veils are not meant to be there forever. The desolation is not meant to be there forever. The images will need to be unveiled again as we celebrate his resurrection. It's not natural for those to be covered. Just in the same way, it's not natural for us to live our life feeling separated from God. That needs to be recovered. We need to experience the resurrection. And that's what Jesus desires for us in our life, to bring us out of those times when we feel desolation, to know that he is present at all times.